Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindy Baldy, and this is my husband and co-host, Jeffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Hello, Musers. Today is the third of 3 mini-episodes with Jefferson Beak Howell. Beak had a 37-year career in the Marines, with his last position being a lieutenant general. From there, he went on to be the director of the Johnson Space Center, and then a member of the faculty at the LBJ School at the University of Texas at Austin, which is where we met him. This mini-episode is going to share a leadership experience about leading through tragedy, the importance of organizations planning for disaster, and the importance, as a leader, of keeping, planning, and articulating what the future will look like.
So now let's turn our attention to what you may consider the most kind of high-profile crisis that you were a part of.
I think it was a national catastrophe.
Okay.
And was a crisis at the Johnson Space Center.
Okay.
And it was horrible. The day we lost Columbia, the shuttle Columbia, when it came home and came apart.
And what was your position at that time?
I was the center director of the Johnson Space Center. And it was prior to me being there, the center director had been the owner of both the Space Shuttle and International Space Station programs and was responsible for them. And so he was a very powerful man.
Sure.
By the time I became center director, there had been one before me. Sean O'Keefe had come in as the administrator, and he took, before he made me the center director, he took some of that authority away from the JSC center director and developed a manned spaceflight office in NASA headquarters in Washington. Put a guy named Bill Reedy, good, very capable astronaut, to be in charge of that. And so the center directors and the manned spaceflight business, Johnson Space Center, Marshall in Alabama, Kennedy down in Florida, they all worked under Reedy, who was the head of all that kind of stuff by this time. And so the Space Shuttle and Space Station programs, you still had a lot of control of the personnel that worked on them. They worked for you as the center director, but the program itself was behooving to the headquarters, NASA, headquarters in Washington, D.C., under Reedy. And so there was a lot of confusion at that time about what are the limits of my authority, what do I do or don't do, what am I in charge of, what am I not in charge of. And that affected a lot of people in the ranks. They were confused about who they really worked for. And so we were still sorting all that out. I was in my first year as a center director. I had not completed a year yet when in January we lost Columbia.
And so you were sorting out the confusion about sort of who you turned, not for you, but for the people at the center, who they actually turned to well before the crisis. So you're going into a crisis with basically not clear lines of hierarchy.
That's correct.
Okay.
Wow.
And that was all of NASA was still struggling. There'd been a lot of reorganization. And we changed our mission statement and all that stuff. And we're still getting grips on what we were. But O'Keefe was a mover and a shaker. He was trying to get things done. I think when President Bush brought him in there, he said NASA is just sort of they're treading water. They're not, advancing. They're not getting ahead. And he wanted to get that going. And was changing a lot of stuff. And we were part of that. So anyway, on a fateful Saturday morning, I'd gone down to lunch. The center director of JSC always went to the pre-launch meetings when we gave final approval for a launch. And then you always attended the launches down in Florida. But you would immediately fly home to Houston because they were now, the minute they got off the pad, they were under the control of Houston Center. And that's flight control or space control in Houston was in charge of them. And so those were my guys, and we were in charge of the shuttle. And this had been a great mission. It was at that time we'd been very busy since I was in my 11th month of head of the center, and we had 4 launches during that time. That was quite a pace.
And you had retired from the Marine Corps at this point?
Yes, I was retired Lieutenant General, and was now an SES 16. I was the Senior Executive Service, equivalent to a 4-star general.
So
if you want to look at it,
promotion,
yeah,
too funny.
So I was actually equivalent to Joe Preer by this time.
Wow.
But anyway, I wasn't in the Marine Corps anymore. But we go to the launch, good launch, and the Columbia's mission was quite unique compared to the missions that had been going on for the last couple of years. They were all assembly missions for the International Space Station. Mm-hmm. And the shuttle was carrying a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Up there, they were hooking up in space.
Yeah.
To get this.
Like a U-Haul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They really were.
Sure.
But they brought a qualified crew that would do extravehicular activity, spacewalking to hook things up and get that done, and then they come back home. And Columbia was different. It had been a mission that had been planned and postponed several times to do scientific research in space on the shuttle. And so they had a laboratory they put into the cargo bay of the shuttle itself, that the astronauts could go back into and do lab work and scientific. And so the crew was made up mostly of non-aviators, non-flyers, who were scientists and engineers who worked on all those experiments they had brought up there. Mm-hmm. And they had done that for 16 days. They'd done it for 2 weeks. And it was a great, they were just doing wonderful stuff. The reports we got back down were fantastic.
Yeah.
And we were really eager to celebrate their great success when they got back. And they were coming back that morning on a Saturday morning. For all recoveries, I would stay in the Johnson Space Center in Mission Control. They had a center director's cupola overlooking Mission Control. Keep you out of the way, but you had observation, you had all the communications, and have the other heavies from JSC up there. And always John Young, who was, had walked on the moon and was sort of our senior astronaut research, fellow, who was, sort of the old salt who everybody listened to. And he was there, and the head of the shuttle program, head of the ISS program were there, and Ron Dittemore had the shuttle program at that time. And I'm there with my deputy, Randy Stone, and we're up there and sort of laughing and scratching because everything had gone so well, and they're on their way back, and they'd gone through the first phases of re-entry, and everything was working swimmingly. And so they're just hitting the west coast of the United States on their way to Florida, which was going to be about a minute and a half away.
Wow.
And it was amazing. And all of a sudden our people down on the floor start seeing bad things on their monitors, and they come up saying, hey, we're seeing irregularities. And so they call up to the shuttle saying, do you read it? We see this, what's going on? No response. And about 10 minutes later or less, or half a minute later, really, we get a call from outside saying, do you have your televisions on, which we never had on during a recovery of a mission. He said, well, turn it on. I was on CNN because they're watching the shuttles coming in, and it's on television. And so that's when we realized it was catastrophe. And then I'll never forget, one of these things you never forget, Ron Dittemore runs over to me and he would say, I need that phone, Beak. I had a one and only phone in the cupola, and he dials the number to put together emergency reaction team that they have, that they've organized. And he said, he looked up at me, he said, Beak, I was here for Challenger. You have just begun your worst nightmare. Man. And he was right. And I was still sort of in denial. I thought they were going to appear okay. Everybody was just mistaken, and this was going to work out. And
well, it's such an abrupt ending to like a successful
it was
mission.
Horrible. Now, on launch, every launch, foam popped off of the external tank on the shuttle. The shuttle was attached to a huge external tank that had two tanks inside of it, one filled with liquid hydrogen, one filled with liquid oxygen. And those two would be fed into the shuttle to their liquid oxygen engines and ignite. You put those two together and you had a good fire, Mm-hmm. And that's what fueled that. And since it was, so cold, they were all frozen, that the tank itself could form ice on it, particularly in the Florida atmosphere, they're so humid down there. Mm-hmm. And so they had learned one of the ways to deal with it is to spray a foam covering on the external tank. And they did that using machines and hand in the hard to reach places. They did with hand spraying, and that was done in New Orleans, in a base we had in New Orleans. That's where they built the tanks and put that foam. So every shuttle would have foam coming off the tank on launch, because they call it the popcorning effect.
Sure.
The shuttle would go up, the foam would expand, and a lot of it would pop off and hit the belly of the
Harmless.
shuttle. And the shuttle belly was a bunch of tiles that were made out of blown glass. And they could withstand over 3,000 degrees of plasma burning on them, but you could punch a hole in it with your finger. That's how fragile that stuff was.
Wow.
And the foam coming off would hit it and could actually damage the
Oh, really?
tiles.
Okay. So
And
it wasn't harmless.
That was a common occurrence on the shuttle. On every shuttle launch, you would have foam damage.
And you just didn't think that it was a big deal because with the holes?
Someone had noted a bigger chunk of foam than normal came off and looked like it might have impacted the bottom of the shuttle, on the way. But there wasn't a clear picture. We had movies of it, and requests had been made to get the intelligence service that ran the spy satellites to take a picture of it and see if they could see anything while it was up there. That wasn't approved. But people were concerned about that, but we had done a lot of analysis. I mean, they would pound everything flat anytime there was an issue, and I was briefed, and the whole of NASA was briefed, Mr. O'Keefe and everybody, that we've run analysis and we think that this is okay. That the shuttle, it had foam hit the shuttle, but it'll be okay. Well, it wasn't okay. It had a big chunk of foam. It hit the leading edge, which was
on the takeoff.
On takeoff. On the launch.
Right.
And it was already traveling at about 1,000 miles an hour, and when that thing hit, it just, it's the same kind of foam that you get when you get a new computer or what have you in a box. You could just, knock it around, and it's not going to hurt you, but if it hits you going 1,000 miles an hour, it'll take your head off.
Right.
And it hit the leading edge and cracked the leading edge, and we didn't know that.
Yeah.
And the crew could not see that from inside. They didn't know. They were not familiar, So everybody was confident, and the crew had been briefed that this had occurred, and they were confident that everything was A-okay.
Hello, Management Musers. Today, I want to talk to you about executive team building. Our executive team building products help open the lines of communication so you and your core leadership team can smartly talk and think through thorny issues. We offer multi-session packages aimed to open up the minds and the mouths of those around you. So email or call us today at ondemandleadership.com.
So take us back to that minute. You're still having a half a moment of this isn't happening.
Yeah.
They're just going to reappear.
But Ron's calling. I found out, NASA went into crisis management mode, and they were able to do this because of the Challenger launch, explosion that had happened back in the mid-80s.
I remember. I'm from New Hampshire. Krista McCullough was a school teacher in Concord.
She was wonderful. And so that awful tragedy, NASA had learned some great lessons about organizing, practicing for a disaster, and being ready, trying to be ready for a disaster. And the disaster is never quite what you think it's going to be, but at least you're organized, you practice. And we had all of our disaster control teams and emergency reaction teams organized. They all met and started coming together about collecting evidence, and recovery of the wreckage, which was spread out all the way from west of Fort Worth into Louisiana.
Wow.
And we did that.
Yeah.
But it was quite an operation. But at that time, when it became obvious that it had come apart, we lost all those, it was 7 astronauts, and they were a wonderful crew, wonderful people. I had met them all and had dinner with them, and it was just awful. And we had a lot of, the Johnson Space Center on a daily basis at that time was very busy because of the shuttle program and the International Space Station program. We had about 16,000 employees there. About 3,000 were civil servants. All the rest were contractor employees. But those contractor employees had been there for years.
Yeah, sure.
They were all old NASA hands, and they loved what they were doing. And they just took this in its worst way. And I had the first thing as a center director, I started walking around. I realized all our emergency management teams were meeting. The ones up in Washington, D.C., at NASA headquarters, they were meeting, and they were communicating with each other. And we already decided to set up a temporary headquarters there in Louisiana at Barksdale. Is it Barksdale Air Force Base? It is there.
I think so,
outside of Shreveport.
Yeah.
And all that was that organization, and we had people in charge and, taking charge and going to look.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out as a center director, what do I do?
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting.
Because I'm not on any of these teams.
Right.
And I'm invited to all their meetings. I go and I monitor and see what they're doing, but they were just all heads down and working hard. And,
right, they're working the crisis.
Yeah, and I'm observing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and some of that.
I realized, well, let me start thinking at the highest level and think about what hasn't been done, what needs to be done. And all of a sudden I realized, does the crew of the International Space Station know about this? And I went to the ISS program, and we had a control room because we had a crew up on the ISS.
Sure.
Ken Bowersox was the commander and Naval Academy graduate. And he was, and they were in a sleep cycle. They were not aware this had happened. And so I called Sean O'Keefe and said, I'm going to call Ken and let them know what's occurred and tell them they need to start planning for bad things. And he said, go for it. And so I went down the International Space Station control room, and we called up and woke them up. And I told Ken what had occurred, that he lost 7 of his best friends. And you're not going to have a ride home waiting for you.
You're going to have to stay up there for a while.
Yeah, and so you need to start thinking about supplies and what you have now and assess, what you don't have, what you need. And we're going to get help from the Russians, but none of that's been worked out yet.
Right.
So we got that going. That was sort of my first step. Second thing I did, I said I need a personal representative at this headquarters in Louisiana, and I found one of my department heads who was a former astronaut, and I got him and I said, "Are you on any of these?" He said, "No, sir, I'm not." I said, "Okay, here's what you're going to be my personal rep. I want you to be in New Orleans." Just to monitor what's going on. You're going to call me twice a day and brief me on what's happening and what you know. And if I have any questions, you're going to try to find the answers. And that's the way we'll work this. I'll stay here and you work. And he was more than happy to do that. And his name was John Casper, Air Force guy. Good man.
Yeah.
But so we got that going. And we worked through all our responses. All of a sudden, the press is just coming in on the Johnson Space
I
Center.
can only imagine.
Satellite dishes all over the parking lot, and CBS, NBC, everybody, and they all have a microphone, and they're trying to find employees and saying, how do you feel right now? That was a common question. How do you feel?
Which is just a ludicrous question.
Oh yeah,
right?
it's crazy. But I also had to recover the families of the astronauts. They had been down in Florida waiting for them to come in, and we had to get them back to Houston. And we brought them back on we had some Gulfstreams, and I brought them back on them. They came in that afternoon. I went and met them at Ellington, which is butts up against the Johnson Space Center. And we had a flight line there, and I met them and tried to give them my condolences. And the local constables provided escorts for each of them to get them to their home and to keep the press off their yards and to keep them secure. And so that we got that going. And they each of them, because of Challenger, for every launch from then on out, every astronaut had an astronaut buddy who was not on a launch or not on a mission, who would look after their family while they're in space, and then if there was problems, look after them. And we had people doing that.
Yeah.
They were wonderful. They were well trained and well versed. They loved each other. They were great teammates.
Yeah. Sure.
And so we had astronauts with all of them.
Smart.
Looking after them. So we got that going and took care of them, got them home. And by this time, it's the end of the day. It's the end of the evening. And I've checked in with Washington, D.C., and O'Keefe and I had talked. And he really said, I'm going to stick around an hour or two, but you go head on out if you want to. But it looks like everything's doing everything we can. And I said, yes, sir, we'll do that. And I met with my department heads one more time just to check on things. And at that time, Sue Garman, who was my number 3 deputy, she had been with NASA for a long time, a very capable woman, told me, said, Beak, I got a question. He said, when we had Challenger, we put off having a memorial service for several weeks, and we found out that was a mistake, that we need to get everybody together to mourn this together quickly. And I said, you're absolutely right. We need to get this done. And I said, this is Saturday. This was a Saturday evening. I said, how about Monday? Why don't we have a memorial service Monday? And she said, I'd like to be in charge of that and get it organized. I said, you got it, kid. And so she asked for volunteers and immediately got almost 1,000 volunteers to help her. It was remarkable. Yeah. I almost crack up every time I think about it.
Yeah.
These people were just wonderful people. And everybody feels guilty as hell. Everybody feels like it was their fault, So I started looking into that aspect of it. I get with my personnel people and some of my managers and said, how are people reacting? Well, a lot of people had been home because it was a Saturday. And so nothing was really going on at JSC except the recovery operation and mission control. And of course, that was just one place on that huge complex. And so, but people just by duty, they came in. We had thousands come to work. They just came in, and people were distraught. But found out I had several people contemplating suicide, and had to get counselors with them.
Yeah. And how did you find that out?
Through their department heads and their leaders. They came to me and said, we've got an issue here. And I said, okay, if you want me to talk to them, I will, but let's get them to professional counselors. And then within the next several days, we found out that I had a lot of career NASA civil servants and contractors who said, we killed these people. I'm not going to kill anybody else. I'm leaving. And so I had half of my workforce was going to retire, going to leave.
Wow.
And I realized that was my first personal management crisis.
Right.
Was I was going to lose my workforce.
Right. My people were leaving because of their
highly
guilt.
skilled people on top of that.
It became my job to rally them and be a cheerleader and to get them to stay and do their jobs and hang in there. And so I started talking to them personally, having meetings and on closed circuit television, pleading with them, saying, hey, we owe it to those heroes to stay here and get this thing back into space and to recover. And so if you quit now, you're letting them down.
Wow.
So that's
you told it to them like that.
And so I did, and they came through.
Wow.
As a rule, I had a few that quit, but as a rule, everybody hung in there and gutted it out. It took us 2.5 years to get back into space.
What was the, I know you like as an organization, you thought through what had happened and why different decisions weren't made. With Challenger, it was pretty clear retrospectively that the O-rings were a problem and they were looking at truncated data, and some people knew in the room and just didn't speak up. And so was there any of that going on with the Columbia?
We had a JSC investigation of the Columbia mishap, and a squad of talented engineers beating this thing flat. I mean, setting up fault trees all over the walls about, what might have happened, and then tracking and seeing if it's true or not. But they also, Sean O'Keefe asked Admiral Mack, I think was his name, to come in, and the president assigned him to be the investigator, the head of the Columbia Accident Investigation Team. And so they came down to Washington, and O'Keefe made a great decision as a leader. He said, we're going to support them and help them. Challenger, the NASA sort of had a
adversary
rub with,
right, they kind of went inside and protected the organization when they really...
There were a lot of issues there, and so we learned from that, and he said, we're going to play ball and cooperate with everything they do. And we did that, and so I opened up the center to him, and they came in with their team and took over one of my buildings and did a very thorough job. And we started, there were all kinds of theories of what might have happened, and yet there was still the issue of that foam. And so they fired some foam at a graphite, and they cracked it, and they realized that that's probably what happened, and that became their conclusion. And our people had sort of resisted that because they didn't want that to be the reason.
Yeah, right.
But that was what happened, and so that came out. Plasma had gotten in through that crack, and it was made out of aluminum, so it just melted the craft and came apart.
Hello, Management Musers. Today, I want to tell you about my favorite product, the Comprehensive Organizational Benchmark Report and Analysis. That's right, we call it COBRA. And if you want that bad boy to strike at the debilitating uncertainty that fuzzy estimates and half-baked guesses do to your company, and better understand the social and cultural dimensions of your organization, then give us a call or email us at culsure.com. That's culsure.com. Knowing what they knew when everybody made the decision, okay, it looks like foam hit, and everything looks... Is there anything that they would have done, knowing what they know, at that point in time, that would have changed things, other than obviously saying...
That's a good question. That's sort of the big question. And some things that we failed as an organization, and me as a leader, and the shuttle program leadership, NASA leadership, at every flight performance review, they were called FRRs, Flight Readiness Review. Before every launch of a shuttle, you would have an FRR at Kennedy, where all the heavies from Washington, the heavies from JSC, from Marshall in Alabama, from Mississippi and Stennis, and those people at Kennedy would meet, and you go over the entire mission, what might go wrong and what has gone wrong in the past, what have we done about it, and pound all that flat and be satisfied that we had done what needs to be done to make this occur. And so we had that FRR before Columbia, and it had come out that not on the mission prior, but 2 missions prior, a big chunk of foam had come off of the tank, but it just fallen down, had not hit anything. But that had occurred, and nobody was sure. They called it an anomaly. They weren't sure why that had happened.
Yeah.
It's where they hand blew it, where they used a handheld. It's where the cables came out of the tank, and they had to hand foam it. And so they thought, they realized they might have an issue, so they said they were extra careful on doing that and supervising that and that kind of thing. But they're pretty sure that's what happened. It was the same big chunk of foam that
it just fell differently.
It happened once before, and we allowed that to go on without really being guaranteed it wasn't going to happen again.
Yeah.
We failed.
Yeah.
That was a huge failure on our part. And so we still take that to my grave, but it was I'll never forget that, being briefed at that FRR, and I'm at the head table. I'm one of the big shots there in the middle of the room. And I remember sort of a funny feeling in my gut when they briefed that of, are we still going to go ahead and do this without knowing whether we've got that figured out or not, And I sort of mentioned that secretly to the guy next to me, and he said, we're looking, we've looked into that. We've got it covered, kind of deal. Okay. And that was really a huge mistake. I shouldn't have let that go on. But I wasn't the real expert. There are a lot of experts. That's how I'm passing the buck, I guess. But my old experience as a aviator told me, when something like that happens, it's bound to happen again. It's Murphy's rule.
Yeah, but I think that the rule also makes you think that because it was harmless the first time it happened, it'll be harmless in future times when it happens.
Yeah. And so that was something we were aware of. It was called an anomaly, and it was written off as we were okay.
Yeah.
And the crew had been briefed on that.
Yeah.
They knew about it, and of course they're going anyway. But that was just a horrible mistake on our part, and the investigation, nailed us for it, which was true. It was right. They were right to do that.
And so when you think about that experience of the shuttle plus the days and weeks after, as it relates to crisis, what are some things that you take away?
Any organization, small, a team, or a large organization, needs to sit down and assess things that might go wrong and what are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? And organize for that, plan for that, come up with a plan, and then practice your plan from time to time so you're ready. Now, the shuttle was unique. What happened was unique. However, I'm happy to say we were well organized for the reaction to it. People went to work because of their organization and training, and that had all been done by people before me, with both the shuttle program and the Johnson Space Center hierarchy. So that's something that's very important for any organization. You should have a fire plan. If you're in a building,
Sure.
Everybody ought to know how to escape in a fire, and all your employees should know that. And you should have fire drills. And it's a pain in the rear end, but it's important. And you're signaling to your employees that I'm being a pain in the butt, but I'm looking after you. And they appreciate that. They know that their safety is paramount, and you've got to have a plan in case there's something like that happens. So plan for bad things and then come up with a way to deal with it, and then practice it. And we had all this in books, and we had teams that had set up and gone through drills from time to time, and so they were ready to go to work, even though it was really treading new water. It was it was quite a unique experience. We ended up being in charge of the whole recovery operation, and used the Indian tribes that had fought forest fires, came in there to beat through the woods and find pieces of the shuttle throughout East Texas, and that was quite a evolution, quite an operation.
Yeah.
But my biggest, my personal experience was just initially Sue coming up with that plan for a memorial service. I said, in my own mind, I'm thinking, maybe I better call my boss and make sure he knows we're doing this. So I called Sean O'Keefe. I said, we are going to have a memorial service here on Monday, and certainly you are certainly invited to come down and bring whomever you think should come. And he said, I'll be there. And he said, oh, by the way, have you called the president? I said, no, wow. I have not called the president. And he said, well, stand by. And an hour later, he calls back and he said, President Bush has accepted your gracious invitation to come to your memorial service, and you'll be hearing from the Secret Service.
Will be hearing.
I bet so.
Yeah.
And the other light starts flashing on my phone.
Now there's a lot that needs to be done.
It actually happened. It was, this was Joe Dokes of the Secret Service here in the White House, and we're on the White House, and we're bringing the president down to go to your memorial service and participate in it.
Wow.
And he said, we like to see your plan. And I said, sure. I said, well, how about, I said, we're going to do this Monday. This is Saturday night. I said, how about tomorrow? He said, yeah, we'll be there at noon tomorrow, and we like to see your plan. And so I called Sue. By this time, it's about 8 or 9 at night.
Wow.
And I called Sue, and I said, Sue,
I got some news.
You better have a plan, and we got to show it to the Secret Service. And she did that. She came out, she had a layout, and she did an incredible job.
Yeah.
And we had to have, entry points and security because it was a president and all that stuff. And they came, I'll never forget that next day. I'm there in my office on a Sunday, and all these men in dark suits with earpieces and lapel buttons walk in, and very polite, very business-like, very serious. So we've come to see your plan. And so Sue had written out, I put a diagram. We were going to do it outside. And at the Johnson Space Center, the main buildings from building 1 through whatever is sort of a U-shaped series of buildings with a big green space in between. And that's where we were going to do it, in that area. There's some ponds and an area we could do that. And we were planning on, even though this was late January, early February, it was in Houston, it was perfect weather for that kind of thing. And so they look at, I'll never forget the guy, we laid it out on my conference table in my office, and he said, he's going to do this here, and Sue's there, and he's asking her questions about this, that, and the other. And he finally turns to me and said, that is an excellent plan. Knocks it off the table and said, here's how you're going to do it. And he pulls out, he's got a satellite photograph and shows how we're going to set this thing up.
Wow.
So Sue had to change her whole, they're going to have snipers on the roof.
They just wanted you to feel like you were participating.
Yeah. And so that Monday, we had, when the minute the word comes that the president's coming, all the heads of the Democratic and Republican parties are coming from the Senate and the House. All the the justices of the Supreme Court are coming. Every living astronaut who can walk is coming. And we had hosts, we had people to escort them from the airports and railroad stations, what have you, and to bring them and to take care of them, feed them, get them back. And Sue's team did all that.
That's a huge plan.
It was huge. And they did it all, in 24 hours.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was, I tell you, just remarkable. She deserved a medal for that.
Yeah, she does.
It was just, she's passed away now, so she's gone. But that was just a remarkable job. I'm so proud of them for what they did. And I when the president arrived, we met him in a building, and he came in with Mrs. Bush and shook my hand, very gracious and friendly. And I told him who I was, and he said, "Yeah, I know who you are." And so, and I welcomed him and thanked him for being there. And he participated in the ceremony. And O'Keefe, whose father was a career Navy officer, sort of made it into a Navy memorial service. We had the choir, the Navy choir from Washington Navy Yard, and others there, and O'Keefe was in the ceremony, and it was quite a thing, but it was well done. It was on television. I don't know if y'all saw that, but they did a hell of a job. It was a beautiful day. We were very fortunate in that regard. And I'm so proud of Sue and those volunteers for what they did and what they organized and took care of people. And, of course, we had all the astronauts' families there and with their escorts, and it was quite a production, but it was very well done.
Once again, you see the importance of like people from the top coming to put the proper weight on the event.
It was very good, and of course we had very serious meetings after that, but it was we were sort of at the beck and call of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board. They took over, and we helped them. I had almost 200 engineers working for them to help them investigate. Yeah. And they did a great job, and they discovered that, they shot some foam up against that carbon leading edge and cracked it. So they realized that was what happened.
And we talked a lot about a handful of your experiences dealing with crisis up to this point. One of the things we haven't talked about is that you flew many combat missions in Vietnam. Help me remember the number. Do you remember?
A little over 300, about 335 or something like that.
And so I know that you had to that point in your life, experienced loss and death and grief.
Intense moments.
Yeah.
And I mean, when he said that when he was talking about the 2 planes in Japan and that the water looked cold to swim in, that's because he's been swimming before in the water.
Well, I've been to
from
survival.
A downed plane.
Water survival.
Yeah.
Well, didn't you have a plane that also came down, like off
helicopter.
of Hawaii? Oh, it was a helicopter.
Right. I've been in that Huey.
Went
to the drink. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've been through that drill. Of course, the Huey came after I was a squadron commander. That came when I was a colonel and a group commander.
Yeah.
And I'm a squadron commander, lieutenant colonel kind of guy, flying jets, not flying Hueys.
And did any of those experiences, and did any of that sense of loss and grief that you've been through, I mean, nobody ever gets used to that, but did any of that help in the moment?
Prepare you for that moment.
JSC?
I believe so. I believe my whole experience as a Marine and leadership roles I was in prepared me for what happened, to be ready or to react appropriately when these things occurred. And I realized that a leader, and I guess when I was more for PAC, that if you allow yourself in a crisis to get down in the weeds too much, you lose sight of what the big picture, what's going on. So as a leader, you got to be thinking about that. You got to be looking up and out and 2 steps ahead of the organization to help the organization move forward and to get things done correctly. And so that's sort of the way I approached that. Of course, Sean O'Keefe, this was a national tragedy, and it was a NASA crises. Yeah. But of course, for JSC, it was huge. It was just devastating, and so I realized that there were different levels of people decision making to get us through this thing. But return to flight, it was just paramount that we keep our workforce there and focused and dedicated on what needed to be done to get back into space. And we did that. Yeah. And Eileen Collins took a shuttle up there with her crew and got that done. But that was a great moment in sports. Yeah. That was 2.5 years later.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, it was tough.
And the Russians helped you get the International Space Station guys the stuff they needed?
Reluctantly. Yeah. They wanted money.
Wow.
O'Keefe wouldn't give them any, and as a center director, when I went and visited Kazakhstan again in Moscow, they treated me like I was a piece of dirt. I'd been a hero with them prior to that when I would go visit. Now all of a sudden I'm a...
How quickly?
They dedicated a tree to me on this tree grove that had all the cosmonauts' trees dedicated to them.
Wow.
And the U.S. astronauts who'd flown with the Russians.
Yeah.
And they planted me a tree in my honor.
And then they cut it down? No,
Well, it just shriveled up and died. They never watered it. Yeah.
That's almost as good as cutting it down.
That's a
So
good.
the next thing I went over there, it was just dead.
That's a good
So I could tell what esteem
symbolism.
they held me in. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm not watering my tree.
It was a whole different ball game.
Any final thoughts, Beak, about wisdom to share about crisis management?
That's a very good question, and I think you learn in a crisis not to leap to conclusions, but at the same time take care of the immediate needs. As a leader, think about your people. What do they need right now? They're the ones that are going to be dealing with this. So support them, help them have the tools and things they need to get the job done. And so that's very important. And of course, don't leap to conclusions on what might have caused the problem. You find out,
You
get
do
all the
research.
facts before you
Yeah.
crucify anybody, shoot them out, don't shoot them out.
Sure.
Don't fly off the handle. And so as a leader, it's very important, I think, if you can at all possible, try to stay above the crowd and look out and see the big picture and see what needs to be done up and out. And assign trusted agents to do the dirty work underneath. Don't try to get too wrapped in it yourself. You see people micromanaging because they're better at doing it than other people, so they want to do it. That's a big mistake. If you're a leader, you have to give that up.
Sure.
And allow people to do their jobs, even though it might not be as good as you could do it.
Yeah.
So that's really the big thing.
Well, Beak, thanks for letting us into your me room
Yep, we're in the I Love Me room.
and for spending so much time with us this morning talking about crisis management and your stories.
Yeah, and if you have fallen in love with this man as much as we come to love him, and we can tell you he is a beloved public speaker, and he's great. Just what you hear today is what you hear when he's in a room with folks. The most down-to-earth person with the most amazing stories that you're ever going to meet. And so if you're interested, just contact us at the Management Muse, and we can put you in contact with Beak Howell. He won't let you down. A lifetime of great experiences and great
Thanks,
stories. And,
Thank you, Cindy.
Yeah, great.
It's been a pleasure.
Yep.
Yeah, you've had an extraordinary life.
I have. I'm very fortunate. I realize that. But life goes on until it doesn't. But I am a lucky man, no doubt about it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about the topic, check out our show notes. And if you want to help us out, like, share, subscribe, and 5 stars are all deeply appreciated. See you next time on the Management Muse.